this one.
But all right, hey, SEC West, going by the magazine, I don't know if it's alphabetical. I don't know if it's because that's where all these damn Crimson Tide fans go exactly when they grab their magazine. But Alabama, what's to say at this point? But they got the two best players in college football. I don't think you can really argue that, even if you hate Alabama.
Would agree with you. They are the best offensive and best defensive player for
Right,
sure.
Bryce Young, Will Anderson, of course. But let me ask you this, because I'm finding little cracks in the armor here, Steven. Offensive line, I mean, that's been an issue there for Alabama for a little while. They got loaded with 4 and 5 stars, but for some reason the offensive line has been a question mark. They had to get a Vanderbilt transfer in there, and even receiver. It seems like they're having to add guys left and right to, which I feel like at Alabama they shouldn't have to do with the way they're recruiting. But any cause for concern with the offensive line and the receivers having to be rebuilt that entire unit?
I think offensive line is probably the one area that would give me some pause, especially later in the season when you play Texas A&M and eventually you have to play Georgia, because we saw this group, especially against A&M and what Georgia did in the national championship game. But I will say, if you start looking at how the depth chart could shake out and you see Ekiyor and Cohen and McLaughlin on the middle, I think if you're an Alabama fan, you probably feel pretty good about that trio.
Yeah.
The tackle spots are a concern. I think what would give me optimism, if I'm an Alabama fan, would be, yes, Tyler Steen coming in gives you some stability, experienced option. Also, a new offensive line coach, Eric Wolford, coming over from Kentucky. He's been in South Carolina before. And also, maybe just the coaching change sparks. I mean, they have some of these guys who they've brought in the last couple of years who are rated high, just really haven't made an impact yet. So, after the 2020 season was so weird and it hurt, I think, offensive line development, maybe that coaching change plus some of the guys coming in can get this group kind of back on track. I would expect them to be better. It's also one of those things too. It's Alabama. Like, our standard is so kind of scrambled on this that
Right.
they could still be like top 15 good, and then we're talking about that. Well, there's a lot of question marks here. It's really just because the standard is just so high. On the receivers, I like Jermaine Burton. I liked him at Georgia. I think he was not necessarily underutilized, but I think he will be a featured player in this offense for Alabama. And then Tyler Harrell, who they brought over from Louisville. I wouldn't say the same player as Jamison Williams, but the same sort of skill set with the big speed, top end speed at the end, who can stretch the field.
Yeah, and even at this time last year, Jamison Williams was not even that. He was not a household name by any means.
Right. A part of that deep Ohio State receiver room with Olave and Garrett Wilson, both drafted in the first round. Another weapon for Alabama would be Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, that's another part of it is the transfer portal additions is that they're all like high 5-star impact players. So Gibbs is a all-purpose running back at Georgia Tech who I think will shine in the SEC, catching the ball, returns, big plays on the ground. So, I mean, they may not be as dynamic in the air early on because of some of the turnover, but the running backs for Alabama are deep once again, especially with Gibbs.
Now, early in the season, though, they do go to Texas, and it's fascinating, Stephen. I had a guy on just recently, Kelly Ford. He does resume and schedule rankings, analytics, and he said, according to his model, that trip to Texas, he still got it as a 15-point spread, but he said that's the toughest game on Alabama's schedule because it's in Austin and everything. I was kind of floored by that. What can you tell Alabama fans about Texas who, I don't know how in the hell they get rated? I mean, hell, weren't they 5 and 7 last year?
Yeah, I mean, I've fallen into this trap too, so I'm just as guilty as anybody. I think the first thing about Texas is Steve Sarkisian. Like, there's a familiarity there between Sarkisian and Alabama. Did not have a great debut last season. I don't think it's all of his fault, though. The offensive line, defensive line, stopping the run, issues for Texas last year really probably couldn't be fixed in 1 year. They did have a weird kind of thing going on where they would be leading the third quarter and fall apart in the second half. So that's something that we'll see if Texas is a deeper roster this year, can make an impact. I think if you're an Alabama fan, the names to know: Bijan Robinson at running back, one of the best in college football. Quinn Ewers, the former 5-star quarterback who was at Ohio State, transferred to Texas, and they have one of the better receiving cores in college football. But also notice what we didn't talk about, which was offensive line, defensive line. So it is a tough road trip in the second week of the season. But if I'm ranking the toughest games, for me, it's at Tennessee and Texas A&M for Alabama.
And what do you think? I try to make this point that when you beat Alabama, because, hell, hardly anybody ever does it, But once you get over that mountain like Texas A&M did, do you think there's anything to those players now? I don't care where the game's played. They've got confidence that they can knock off the Crimson Tide, that they are human. Because I feel like 90% of the teams that play Alabama, they're just so marveled by them, and it's like an impossible task to beat them. Do you think that at all plays into the psychology of that matchup, Texas A&M at Alabama?
Absolutely. Well, I think first of all, the whole psychology of this matchup this offseason is fascinating because of what's happened with Jimbo and Nick Saban. I mean, it's been such an unusual kind of path for these two with Fisher and Saban and what happened last year, and in a game that, I mean, idiots like me had Alabama winning, easily, and Texas A&M goes out there and stuns us all, and after
Right.
didn't even think it was going to be a possibility based upon the way they played. So I think the dynamics around this offseason have added a layer of intrigue to that game. I think certainly once you topple the giant, it becomes a little bit easier. But man, going on the road in Tuscaloosa with Bryce Young, Will Anderson, everything that's gone on, revenge factor, that's going to be pretty tough.
Those fans are going to be fired up for that one. You know what?
Yeah, absolutely.